Navy SEAL snipers scoffed at her gear, but went silent. When she nailed a target from 2 miles away. Navy SEAL Sniper's Story, Part 1. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the Nevada desert training ground as Sarah Martinez stepped out of the military transport vehicle. Dust swirled around her boots as she surveyed the sprawling camp that would be her home for the next 8 weeks. At 28 years old, she had already spent 6 years as an Army Ranger sniper. But this was different. This was the most elite sniper training program in the world, where only the best of the best came to prove themselves. Sarah adjusted her gear bag on her shoulder and walked toward the registration tent. She could feel eyes on her immediately. In a world dominated by men, she stood out like a beacon. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her green eyes held a determination that had carried her through every challenge in her military career. She had earned her place here through skill alone, but she knew that wouldn't stop the skepticism. The camp buzzed with activity as snipers from different branches of the military gathered for what many considered the ultimate test of marksmanship. Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Marine Corps snipers, and even a few Air Force personnel mingled in small groups, sizing each other up. Sarah noticed how conversations seemed to pause as she passed by, followed by whispers and sidelong glances. Inside the registration tent, Sergeant Major Williams, a grizzled veteran with 30 years of experience, handed her a folder containing her schedule and bunk assignment. His weathered face showed no emotion as he looked her up and down. "You sure you're in the right place, soldier?" he asked, though his tone suggested it was more of a statement than a question. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "Yes, Sergeant Major, I'm exactly where I need to be." Her voice was steady, confident, and carried the authority of someone who had proven herself countless times before. Williams nodded slowly, a hint of respect flickering in his eyes. He had seen many confident soldiers come and go, but something about this young woman's demeanor told him she wasn't just another hopeful recruit. "Bunk 12, he said, sliding the paperwork across the table. "Training starts at 0500 tomorrow. Don't be late." As Sarah made her way to the barracks, she passed a group of Navy SEALs gathered around a picnic table, cleaning their weapons. Their conversation stopped abruptly when they saw her approaching. The largest of the group, a man with arms like tree trunks and a beard that had seen many missions, stood up and blocked her path. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "Looks like they're letting anyone into this program now." His teammates chuckled behind him, emboldened by their leader's attitude. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Sarah set down her gear bag and faced him directly. Despite being several inches shorter, she commanded the space around her with quiet confidence. "Staff Sergeant Martinez," she replied, deliberately using her rank. "And you are?" The big man's smile faltered slightly. He hadn't expected such a direct response. "Chief Petty Officer Davidson," he said, puffing out his chest. "Been doing this for 15 years, you?" "Long enough," Sarah replied simply, picking up her bag and continuing toward the barracks. Davidson wasn't finished. "Hope you brought some lighter gear," he called out. "This isn't some weekend camping trip. We use real rifles here, not the toy guns they give you Army types." Sarah paused and turned around. The entire group was watching now, waiting for her reaction. She could feel the weight of the moment, understanding that how she handled this confrontation would set the tone for everything that followed. "What kind of rifle do you use, Chief?" she asked, her voice carrying across the small crowd that had gathered. Davidson's chest swelled with pride. "A custom 3038 Lapua Magnum, probably weighs more than you do." His teammates laughed appreciatively. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good rifle," she acknowledged. "I use a 300 Winchester Magnum myself. Different tools for different jobs." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But I suppose we'll find out soon enough which approach works better." The confident smirk on Davidson's face wavered. This wasn't the response he had expected. Most people either backed down from his intimidation or tried to match his bravado. Sarah had done neither. Instead, she had acknowledged his skill while quietly asserting her own competence. As Sarah walked away, she heard Davidson mutter to his teammates, "We'll see how long Little Miss Army lasts when the real shooting starts." But his voice lacked the conviction it had held moments before. That evening, Sarah sat on her bunk, meticulously cleaning her rifle and organizing her gear. Her bunkmate, a quiet Marine sniper named Rodriguez, watched her work with growing curiosity. Unlike the Navy SEALs, Rodriguez seemed genuinely interested in Sarah's presence rather than threatened by it. "Where'd you train?" Rodriguez asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Fort Benning initially," Sarah replied, running a cleaning rod through her barrel. "Then specialized training at Quantico and a few other places I can't talk about." Rodriguez nodded, understanding. Many of the soldiers here had classified training in their backgrounds. "You ever work with SEALs before?" Sarah looked up from her rifle. "A few times. Joint operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. Good soldiers, most of them. But some have trouble accepting that skill doesn't always come in the package they expect." "Davidson's been talking all evening," Rodriguez said quietly. "Says you won't last 3 days." Sarah continued cleaning her rifle, her movements precise and practiced. "What do you think?" Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, studying the woman across from him. He had watched her work for the past hour, noting the care she took with her equipment and the confidence in her movements. Everything about her spoke of experience and professionalism. "I think Davidson might be in for a surprise," he said finally. Outside, the desert wind picked up, sending sand against the barracks windows. In a few hours, the real training would begin, and Sarah would have her first chance to prove that she belonged among the elite. She had faced skepticism her entire career, and it had only made her stronger. Tomorrow would be just another day to show what she was capable of. As she secured her rifle in its case, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. She had spent years preparing for this moment, and she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The Navy SEALs might have scoffed at her gear, but gear didn't make the shooter. Skill, patience, and determination did, and Sarah had all three in abundance. Navy SEAL Sniper's Story. Part 2. The alarm pierced the pre-dawn darkness at exactly 0430 hours. Sarah was already awake, having learned long ago that being prepared was half the battle. She dressed quickly in the dim light, checking her gear one final time before stepping out into the cool desert air. The other snipers were emerging from their bunks, some moving with the fluid efficiency of seasoned veterans, others still shaking off sleep. Sergeant Major Williams stood at the center of the compound, his silhouette barely visible in the pre-dawn gloom. As the snipers gathered in formation, Sarah noticed the way some of the Navy SEALs positioned themselves, creating a subtle barrier between her and the rest of the group. Davidson stood at their center, his massive frame imposing even in the darkness. "Welcome to hell, ladies and gentlemen," Williams announced, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "For the next 8 weeks, you will be pushed beyond your limits. Some of you will excel, others will wash out, and a few of you will discover what it truly means to be a precision marksman." The first day began with physical training that would have broken ordinary soldiers. Sarah kept pace with the group as they ran 5 miles through the desert terrain, her breathing controlled and steady. She could hear Davidson and his team making comments behind her, questioning whether she would make it through the first week. After PT came equipment inspection. The instructors moved through the ranks like hawks, examining every piece of gear with microscopic attention to detail. When they reached Sarah, Instructor Chen, a former Marine sniper with legendary status, spent extra time examining her rifle and equipment setup. Sarah's .300 Winchester Magnum was a work of art. Every component had been carefully selected and precisely adjusted. The rifle bore the scars of multiple deployments, but every scratch told a story of missions accomplished and lives saved. Her scope, a high-end Schmidt & Bender with custom modifications, gleamed despite its battle-worn exterior. "Interesting choice," Chen commented, running his fingers along the rifle's stock. "Most people go for the bigger calibers in this program." "Bigger isn't always better," Sarah replied respectfully. "This rifle and I have been through a lot together. I know exactly how she'll perform in any condition." Chen nodded approvingly and moved on. Behind him, Sarah heard Davidson snort with derision. "Probably can't handle the recoil of a real rifle," he muttered to his teammates just loud enough for her to hear. The first shooting exercise took place on the 1,000-yard range. Each sniper would fire 5 shots at a standard target, with scores determining the initial rankings for the program. Sarah watched as the others took their turns, noting their techniques and results. Most scored well, as expected from elite marksmen. When Davidson's turn came, he made quite a show of it. His massive rifle boomed across the desert, and his spotter called out hits that drew appreciative nods from the other SEALs. His final score was impressive. 4 hits in the 9 ring and 1 perfect 10. "That's how it's done," Davidson announced as he stood up from the firing line. his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had just proven his point. Sarah's turn came last. As she approached the firing line, she could feel every eye on her. The weight of expectation and skepticism hung in the air like the desert heat. She settled into position behind her rifle, adjusting her body until she felt the perfect natural point of aim. Through her scope, the 1,000-yard target looked impossibly small. The morning wind had picked up slightly, creating subtle but important variables that would affect her shots. Sarah observed the mirage through her scope, reading the wind patterns with the skill that came from years of experience. Her first shot broke clean and true. The spotter's voice crackled through the radio. "Hit 9 ring, 12 o'clock. The second shot followed quickly. "Hit 10 ring, center mass." By the fourth shot, the informal chatter among the watching snipers had died completely. Sarah's grouping was tight, tighter than anyone else had managed that morning. The fifth and final shot was the most important. Sarah took her time, controlling her breathing and waiting for the perfect moment when her natural respiratory pause aligned with the wind conditions. The rifle bucked gently against her shoulder, and she knew immediately that it was a good shot. "Hit, 10 ring, dead center," the spotter announced. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah had not only outshot Davidson, she had achieved the highest score of the morning. As she stood up from the firing line, she could see the shock on several faces, including Davidson's. Instructor Chen walked over to examine the target when it was brought back from the range. The 5 bullet holes formed a group that could be covered by a silver dollar, with 3 of them forming an even tighter cluster in the 10 ring. "Outstanding shooting. Martinez," Chen announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's the kind of precision we expect from elite marksmen." Davidson's face had turned red with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. As Sarah packed up her gear, he approached her with his teammates flanking him like bodyguards. "Lucky shooting," he said, his voice tight with controlled frustration. "Anyone can get hot for one string of fire." Sarah looked up at him calmly as she secured her rifle in its case. "You're absolutely right, Chief. One good group doesn't prove anything. Good thing we have 7 more weeks to figure out who belongs here." The rest of the day included classroom instruction on advanced ballistics and environmental factors. Sarah took detailed notes, occasionally asking technical questions that demonstrated her deep understanding of the subject matter. She noticed how some of the other students began to pay attention to her contributions to the discussions. During the lunch break, Rodriguez approached her with his meal tray. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "Please do," Sarah replied, making room at the small table. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Rodriguez spoke. "That was some impressive shooting this morning. Where'd you learn to read wind like that?" Sarah smiled. "My father was a competitive shooter before he joined the army. He taught me that the rifle is just a tool. The real skill is in understanding everything else. The wind, the air density, the target, even your own heartbeat. He used to say that anyone could pull a trigger, but it takes patience and knowledge to make the shot count when it matters." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Sarah said quietly. "Lost him in Iraq when I was 19. That's part of why I'm here. He always said that if you're going to do something, you should strive to be the best at it." Rodriguez nodded respectfully. As they continued their conversation, Sarah noticed that several other snipers had begun listening to their discussion. Word was already spreading about her performance that morning, and the dynamic in the camp was beginning to shift. That evening, as Sarah cleaned her rifle and prepared for the next day's challenges, she reflected on the morning's events. She had proven herself in the first test, but she knew that Davidson and his supporters wouldn't give up easily. The real tests were still ahead, and the pressure would only increase as the program progressed. Outside her window, the desert stretched endlessly toward the horizon, its harsh beauty reminding her of all the places her skills had taken her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she was content knowing that she had taken the first step toward earning the respect of her peers. The scoffing was far from over, but she was ready for whatever came next. Navy SEAL Sniper's Story. Part 3. 3 weeks into the program, the desert training ground had transformed into a proving ground where only the strongest survived. 7 snipers had already washed out, unable to handle the physical demands and mental pressure that came with elite training. Sarah had not only survived but had begun to establish herself as one of the top performers in the class. Each morning brought increasingly difficult challenges, The instructors seemed determined to push every student beyond their breaking point, searching for the mental toughness that separated good snipers from legendary ones. Sarah thrived in this environment, drawing on reserves of determination that had been forged through years of facing skepticism and proving herself repeatedly. The fourth week began with an announcement that sent ripples of excitement and nervous energy through the remaining students. Sergeant Major Williams stood before them in the pre-dawn darkness, his weathered face more serious than usual. "Today marks the beginning of your advanced field exercises," he announced. "You will be working in teams of 2, conducting surveillance and precision shooting exercises under combat conditions. Your performance will determine who advances to the final phase of this program." Sarah found herself paired with Staff Sergeant Jackson, a quiet but highly skilled Army sniper from North Carolina. Jackson had initially been skeptical of Sarah's abilities, but 3 weeks of watching her consistent performance had earned his respect. Unlike some of the others, he judged her solely on her demonstrated competence. "You ready for this?" Jackson asked as they prepared their gear for the first field exercise. "Been ready since day 1, Sarah replied, checking her rifle one final time. "What about you?" Jackson grinned. "Let's show these Navy boys how Army snipers get the job done." The exercise was designed to simulate a real-world mission. Teams would be inserted into the desert terrain with orders to establish observation posts and engage multiple targets at varying distances. The catch was that they would be hunted by a team of instructors playing the role of enemy forces. Getting caught meant automatic failure. Sarah and Jackson moved through the desert landscape like ghosts, using every piece of available cover to mask their approach to their assigned objective. Sarah's ability to read the terrain and plan their route impressed Jackson, who had expected to take the lead in navigation and tactics. Their first target was a simulated enemy camp at 200 yards. Sarah settled into her shooting position behind her rifle, while Jackson served as her spotter, using his binoculars to identify targets and read wind conditions. The morning air was still, but Sarah knew that could change quickly in the desert. Target 1. Enemy commander, 11 o'clock, 247 yards. Jackson whispered into his radio headset. Sarah adjusted her scope's elevation turret, compensating for the additional distance. Through her reticle, she could see the human-shaped target clearly. She controlled her breathing, waiting for the perfect moment between heartbeats. The shot broke clean, and Jackson watched through his binoculars as the target snapped backward from the impact. "Clean hit center mass," he reported. They engaged 4 more targets from that position before relocating to avoid detection by the roving instructor teams. Their movement through the desert was textbook perfect, using the terrain features to mask their signatures from potential observers. Meanwhile, Davidson and his partner, another Navy SEAL named Torres, were struggling with their assignment. Davidson's overconfidence had led them into a compromised position, and they had been killed by an instructor team after only completing half of their required engagements. "This is embarrassing," Torres muttered as they were escorted back to the base camp. "We're supposed to be the best of the best." Davidson's face was dark with frustration and wounded pride. "It's this damn desert," he growled. "We're water guys, not sand rats." As the day progressed, Sarah and Jackson continued to excel. They had successfully engaged all of their assigned targets and avoided detection by the hunter teams. Their communication was flawless, with each man anticipating the other's needs and movements. Their final target of the day was the most challenging yet, a long-range shot at 1,800 yards. The target was positioned on a ridgeline that required them to shoot uphill at an extreme angle. Environmental factors included shifting winds and the heat mirage that rose from the desert floor. "This is going to be tricky," Jackson observed, studying the target through his spotting scope. "The wind is switching directions every few minutes, and that uphill angle is going to affect the bullet's trajectory." Sarah was already calculating the shot in her head, taking into account all the variables. She had made similar shots in combat, but never under the scrutiny of instructors who were looking for any excuse to eliminate candidates. "What do you think?" Jackson asked. "About a 12-minute wind from the left, switching to maybe 8 minutes from the right?" Sarah watched the mirage patterns through her scope for several more seconds. "I'm seeing the same thing," she agreed. "The question is timing the shot for when the wind is most predictable." They waited and observed for 20 minutes, learning the pattern of the wind shifts. Sarah made small adjustments to her position, finding the most stable shooting platform possible. When she was ready, she loaded a single round and settled behind her rifle. The crosshairs settled on the target as Sarah controlled her breathing. She had learned long ago that rushed shots rarely hit their mark, especially at extreme distances. Patience was as important as accuracy and precision shooting. The wind shifted to her favor, and Sarah felt the familiar calm that came over her before a critical shot. Her finger took up the trigger slack and the rifle bucked against her shoulder with its familiar recoil. Through his spotting scope, Jackson watched the bullet's trace as it arced across the desert landscape. The flight time seemed to last forever, but he knew it was only a few seconds. "Hit," he shouted as the target snapped backward. Dead center hit at 1,800 yards. The radio crackled with the voice of the range safety officer who had been observing their performance. "Outstanding shot, Martinez. That's the longest confirmed hit of the exercise so far." As they packed up their gear for the return trip to base camp, Jackson shook his head in amazement. "I've been doing this for 12 years, he said, "and I've never seen shooting like that under pressure." Sarah smiled as she secured her rifle in its case. "Thanks, but that's what we train for, right? Anyone can shoot well on a perfect day. It's the difficult shots that separate the professionals from the hobbyists." When they returned to base camp that evening, word of Sarah's 1,800-yard shot had already spread through the remaining students. Even some of the instructors were talking about it, comparing it to legendary shots from previous classes. Davidson sat with his teammates, his mood darker than usual. The failure of his team combined with Sarah's success had created a situation he wasn't used to dealing with. Throughout his career, he had been accustomed to being the top performer, the one others looked up to and tried to emulate. "She got lucky," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "No one shoots that consistently without some kind of advantage." Torres looked at his team leader with concern. "Chief, maybe it's time to admit that she's just good at this. Her scores speak for themselves." Davidson's jaw tightened. He wasn't ready to concede anything yet. The program was far from over, and he was determined to find a way to prove that Sarah Martinez didn't belong among the elite snipers of the world's most advanced military forces. But as he watched, Sarah calmly cleaning her rifle and reviewing her shooting data from the day's exercises, a small part of him began to wonder if he had underestimated his opponent. The woman across the compound wasn't just lucky or temporarily hot. She was demonstrating the kind of consistent excellence that defined true professionals. The real test would come in the final weeks of the program, when the challenges would push everyone to their absolute limits. Davidson was counting on those ultimate tests to expose what he believed were Sarah's limitations. But deep down, a growing voice in his mind wondered if she might just prove him wrong. Navy SEAL Sniper Story, Part 4. The 6th week of training brought an unexpected challenge that would test not just marksmanship skills, but mental resilience under extreme pressure. Sergeant Major Williams gathered the remaining 15 students around a detailed topographical map spread across a folding table in the command tent. "Your final field exercise will be the most demanding test of your training," Williams announced, his voice carrying the weight of years of experience. "You will be conducting a simulated assassination mission deep in hostile territory. Each team will have 72 hours to reach their target area, establish a hide site, conduct surveillance, and execute a precision shot at maximum range." The students leaned forward, studying the map intently. The target area was located in the most challenging terrain the Nevada desert had to offer: rocky outcroppings, deep ravines, and wide expanses of open ground that would offer little concealment. "Your target will be a high-value individual who will appear at a designated location for exactly 30 seconds, Williams continued. "Miss that window and you fail. Get detected by our hunter teams and you fail. This exercise will determine who advances to the final phase and who goes home." Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before a challenging mission. Beside her, Jackson reviewed the map, mentally calculating distances and identifying potential routes to their objective. Their partnership had grown stronger with each exercise, and they now functioned as a seamless team. Davidson, who had been paired with a new partner after Torres was eliminated the previous week, studied the map with growing frustration. His new teammate, Corporal Morrison from the Marines, was skilled but inexperienced in the kind of long-range operations that Davidson preferred. "This is going to be a nightmare," Morrison whispered to Davidson, That terrain looks impossible. Nothing's impossible if you know what you're doing, Davidson replied, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. The past few weeks had shaken his self-assurance, and he was feeling the pressure to prove himself before the program ended. The teams were inserted into the field at different times and locations to prevent them from following each other. Sarah and Jackson found themselves beginning their mission at 200 hours, carrying full packs and enough supplies to last 3 days in the desert. Moving through the darkness, they navigated by compass and memory, avoiding the obvious routes that might be monitored by the hunter teams. Sarah's ability to read terrain in low-light conditions impressed Jackson, who had initially expected to handle most of the navigation duties. "How did you learn to move like this?" Jackson asked during a brief rest stop. "Most snipers I know are good shots, but you move through terrain like infantry." Sarah adjusted her pack straps before answering. "My father taught me hunting before I ever joined the army. He used to say that getting to the right position was more important than having the perfect rifle. You can have the best equipment in the world, but if you can't get close enough to use it effectively, it's worthless." They reached their initial observation point as the sun began to rise, having covered nearly 12 miles of difficult terrain without being detected. From their position on a ridge overlooking the target area, they could see the entire valley spread out below them. The target location was a small compound built around what appeared to be an abandoned mining operation. Intelligence briefings had indicated that their high-value target would appear on a specific balcony of the main building at exactly 1400 hours for a 30-second window. "Range to target?" Sarah asked as she set up her rifle. Jackson used his laser rangefinder to get a precise measurement. "Tow 347 yards, he announced. "That's going to be a challenging shot even in perfect conditions." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Tow 347 yards was nearly a mile and a half, far beyond what most snipers would consider a makeable shot. The distance would require perfect execution of every fundamental skill she had learned throughout her career. They spent the entire first day observing the target area, learning the patterns of the mock enemy forces and identifying potential complications for their shot. Sarah made detailed notes about wind patterns, noting how the air currents changed throughout the day as the sun heated different parts of the valley. That evening, as they settled into their hide site for the night, Jackson voiced what they were both thinking. "That's the longest shot I've ever attempted," he admitted. "At that distance, everything has to be perfect. The wind call, the range estimation, even the temperature and humidity." Sarah nodded, understanding the magnitude of the challenge. "I've made shots at similar distances in combat," she said quietly, "but never under this kind of scrutiny. In the field, you often get multiple attempts if you miss. Here, we get one chance." Miles away, Davidson and Morrison were struggling with their own challenges. They had taken a more direct route to their objective, only to discover that it led them through an area heavily patrolled by the hunter teams. They had been forced to take cover and wait for several hours, putting them behind schedule. "We need to move faster," Davidson insisted as they prepared to resume their approach. "If we're late to the target area, we'll miss our window." Morrison looked at the map with concern. "Chief, if we rush this approach, we might walk right into one of those hunter teams. Maybe we should stick to the original plan." Davidson's frustration was reaching a boiling point. Throughout his career, he had been accustomed to success, but this training program was challenging him in ways he hadn't expected. "I've been doing this longer than you've been in the Marines," he snapped. "We do this my way." The second day brought new challenges for all the teams. The weather had shifted, bringing gusty winds and changing light conditions that would affect long-range shooting. Sarah and Jackson used the time to refine their shooting data, making detailed calculations about how the environmental factors would affect their bullets' trajectory. Sarah's meticulous approach to preparation impressed Jackson, who had worked with many snipers throughout his career. While other teams might rely on instinct and experience, Sarah treated every variable as a mathematical problem to be solved. "You know," Jackson said as he watched her work, "I've seen a lot of good snipers, but I've never seen anyone prepare this thoroughly for a single shot." Sarah looked up from her data book, where she had filled several pages with calculations and observations. "My father used to say that luck was what happened when preparation met opportunity. I don't believe in lucky shots, especially at this distance." As the afternoon of the second day approached, teams began positioning themselves for their shots. The radio chatter from the command post indicated that several teams had already been eliminated by the hunter teams, while others had reached their positions but were struggling with the extreme range requirements. Sarah settled behind her rifle as Jackson took his position with the spotting scope. The target area was clearly visible through their optics, but the distance made even the largest buildings look tiny. At 2,347 yards, their target would appear smaller than a pinhead through Sarah's scope. Wind is steady from the northwest at approximately 15 miles per hour, Jackson reported. Temperature is 92 degrees, humidity is low. Atmospheric pressure is dropping slightly. Sarah made her final calculations, adjusting her scope's elevation and windage turrets to compensate for the extreme distance and environmental conditions. Everything she had learned throughout her career had led to this moment. The radio crackled with the voice of the exercise controller. All teams, stand by. Target will appear in 60 seconds. Sarah's heart rate slowed as she entered the zone of perfect concentration that came before critical shots. At this distance, there would be no second chances. The bullet would take nearly 4 seconds to reach its target, and any small error in calculation would result in a complete miss. Through her scope, she could see the balcony where their target would appear. In 45 seconds, everything would depend on her ability to execute the most challenging shot of her career. Navy SEAL Sniper's Story, Part 5. The moment stretched like eternity as Sarah settled behind her rifle, every nerve in her body attuned to the shot that would define her career. Through her scope, the balcony appeared impossibly small at 2,047 yards. Jackson's breathing beside her was controlled and steady. His spotting scope trained on the same target area. Target appearing now, Jackson whispered into his radio headset. A figure emerged onto the balcony, exactly as briefed. Through her reticle, Sarah could barely make out the human-shaped silhouette against the building's facade. At this distance, the target appeared smaller than the crosshairs themselves, requiring her to aim using the principles of precision shooting that had taken years to master. Sarah's breathing slowed to the rhythm she had practiced thousands of times. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger as she made final micro-adjustments to her point of aim. The wind had remained steady, but at this distance, even the slightest variation could send the bullet wide of its mark. 20 seconds remaining. The world around Sarah faded into background noise. The desert heat, the weight of her equipment, even Jackson's presence beside her disappeared as she entered the zone of perfect focus that separated elite marksmen from ordinary shooters. Her entire universe condensed to the small circle of her scope and the nearly invisible target beyond. 15 seconds. Sarah's heartbeat steadied to its slowest rhythm. Between beats, in that perfect moment of stillness, she applied the final pressure to her trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with familiar authority, sending its precision-crafted bullet arcing across the vast desert landscape. The flight time at that distance was nearly 4 seconds. Through his spotting scope, Jackson tracked the bullet's vapor trail as it cut through the hot desert air. Time seemed suspended as they waited for the inevitable conclusion of physics and skill. Hit, Jackson shouted as the target snapped backward from the impact. Dead center hit at 2,347 yards. The radio immediately erupted with excited chatter from the command post. Exercise controllers confirmed the hit, their voices betraying amazement at what they had just witnessed. Other teams still in position reported their own results, but none came close to the combination of distance and accuracy that Sarah had just achieved. As Sarah and Jackson packed their equipment for the journey back to base camp, neither spoke much about what had just happened. Both understood the significance of the shot, but years of military training had taught them that celebrating too early could lead to complacency. That was something special, Jackson finally said, as they prepared to leave their hide site. In 12 years of doing this job, I've never seen a shot like that under pressure. Sarah secured her rifle in its case, her movements precise and methodical, despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. It was a team effort, she replied. Your wind call was perfect, and your spotting made the difference. The journey back to base camp took them through some of the most challenging terrain of their entire mission. They had to avoid several hunter teams while navigating rocky outcroppings and deep ravines in the fading daylight. But their spirits were high, buoyed by the knowledge that they had accomplished something extraordinary. Meanwhile, Davidson and Morrison were experiencing their own drama. Having rushed their approach to make up for lost time, They had walked directly into a hunter team and been eliminated from the exercise. Davidson sat in the back of the transport vehicle, his face a mask of frustration and wounded pride. "This is unbelievable," he muttered to Morrison. 6 weeks of training and we get taken out by some instructor playing hide-and-seek." Morrison remained diplomatically quiet. He had tried to warn Davidson about rushing their approach, but the Navy SEALs' stubborn pride had overruled tactical sense. Now they were heading back to base camp as failures while other teams were still in the field pursuing their objectives. The ride back to camp was torture for Davidson. Every mile that passed reminded him of his failure, and he knew that word would spread quickly through the tight-knit community of elite snipers. Worse still, he couldn't shake the mental image of Sarah Martinez, the woman he had dismissed and mocked, potentially succeeding where he had failed. Back at base camp, the remaining teams trickled in throughout the evening and following morning. Some had been eliminated by hunter teams, others had failed to reach their objectives in time, and a few had missed their shots entirely. Out of the 15 teams that had started the exercise, only 6 had successfully completed all requirements. Sarah and Jackson arrived at base camp in the early morning hours of the third day, exhausted but victorious. As they reported to the debriefing tent, they could see other students gathering around, eager to hear the results of the exercise. Sergeant Major Williams stood before the assembled group, his weathered face revealing nothing about the outcomes. "This exercise pushed every one of you beyond your comfort zones," he began. "Some of you rose to the challenge while others discovered the limits of their current abilities." He paused, consulting his clipboard before continuing. 6 teams successfully completed all mission requirements. However, 1 team achieved something truly exceptional. Williams looked directly at Sarah and Jackson. Team Martinez-Jackson not only completed their mission flawlessly, but they achieved the longest confirmed hit in the history of this training program, 2,347 yards. A murmur of amazement rippled through the assembled students. Even the instructors looked impressed by the announcement. Sarah felt a flush of pride but kept her expression neutral, understanding that this was only one step in a longer journey. Davidson, who had been standing at the back of the group, felt his stomach drop. The woman he had spent weeks dismissing had just set a record that might stand for years. The reality of Sarah's skill was becoming impossible to deny, even to himself. After the debriefing, several students approached Sarah to congratulate her on the record-breaking shot. Some who had initially been skeptical now looked at her with genuine respect and curiosity about her techniques. Rodriguez, who had been eliminated in the 5th week, shook Sarah's hand warmly. "I heard about your shot from the instructors," he said. 2,300 yards in field conditions. That's legendary shooting." "Thanks," Sarah replied modestly, "but we're not done yet. The final phase is still ahead." Indeed, Williams had announced that the final phase would begin the following week. Only the 6 successful teams would advance, facing challenges that would push their skills to the absolute limit. The program that had started with 30 of the world's best snipers was now down to 12. That evening, as Sarah cleaned her rifle and prepared for the final challenges ahead, she reflected on how far she had come. The skepticism and mockery from the early days seemed like distant memories now, replaced by the grudging respect of her peers and the satisfaction of knowing she had earned her place among the elite. Jackson approached her bunk area, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the mess hall. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering her one of the cups. "Thanks," Sarah said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "What do you think they'll throw at us in the final phase?" Jackson sat down on a nearby footlocker, considering the question. "Probably something we haven't seen before," he said. "They've tested our shooting, our fieldcraft, and our ability to work under pressure. My guess is the final phase will combine everything into one ultimate challenge." Across the compound, Davidson sat alone outside his barracks, staring up at the desert stars. The failure of the field exercise had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself and his assumptions. For the first time in his career, he was questioning whether his confidence had been justified or simply arrogance in disguise. Morrison emerged from the barracks and sat down beside his former team leader. "You okay, Chief?" Davidson was quiet for a long moment before answering. "You know what the worst part is?" he finally said. "It's not that we failed. It's that I convinced myself she couldn't succeed because she didn't fit my idea of what an elite sniper should look like." Morrison nodded, understanding. "She's good, Chief, really good. Maybe it's time to admit that. Davidson watched as Sarah moved around the compound, preparing for the challenges ahead with the same methodical precision that had characterized everything she did. The woman who had once seemed out of place among the elite snipers now looked like she belonged exactly where she was. Yeah, Davidson said quietly. Maybe it is. The final phase would determine who among the remaining 12 would graduate from the most elite sniper training program in the world. Sarah had proven herself capable of extraordinary shooting, but the ultimate tests were still ahead. Whatever challenges awaited in the final phase, she felt ready to face them with the confidence that came from knowing she had already exceeded every expectation placed upon her. Navy SEAL Sniper's Story, Part 6. The final week of the program dawned with an announcement that sent shockwaves through the remaining 12 students. Sergeant Major Williams stood before them with an expression more serious than they had ever seen, flanked by several high-ranking officers whose presence suggested this was no ordinary training exercise. Ladies and gentlemen, Williams began, his voice carrying across the silent compound. Your final examination will not be a simulation. We have received intelligence about a real-world situation that requires immediate attention, and you will be participating in an actual military operation. The students exchanged glances, understanding that everything had just changed. This was no longer about graduation or bragging rights. This was about proving themselves in the ultimate arena where mistakes could have life or death consequences. Colonel Harrison, a distinguished officer with silver hair and combat decorations spanning 3 decades, stepped forward to brief them on the mission. Terrorists have taken hostages at a remote compound approximately 150 miles from here. Intelligence suggests they have anti-aircraft capabilities, making a direct assault extremely dangerous. We need precision marksmen to neutralize key targets and create an opening for rescue operations. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but her training kept her focused and calm. This was what she had spent her entire career preparing for. The moment when all the practice and preparation would be tested in real combat conditions. The target compound is situated in mountainous terrain that will require shots at extreme range, Colonel Harrison continued. Initial reconnaissance suggests engagement distances of up to 2,800 yards. Weather conditions are challenging with variable winds and decreasing visibility. Even the most experienced snipers in the group felt a chill at those numbers. 2,800 yards was approaching the theoretical limits of what was possible with current rifle technology, requiring not just exceptional skill, but also perfect conditions and a measure of luck. The briefing continued with detailed intelligence about the compound layout, terrorist positions, and hostage locations. Each sniper team would be assigned specific targets, with Sarah and Jackson given what was arguably the most challenging assignment: neutralizing a terrorist leader positioned in a tower at the maximum range of 2,800 yards. Why us? Jackson asked quietly as they reviewed their mission packet. Because, Williams replied, you've already proven you can make shots that others consider impossible. This mission requires someone who doesn't know the meaning of the word impossible. As the teams prepared for deployment, Sarah meticulously checked every piece of her equipment. Her rifle, which had never failed her in 6 years of combat, received special attention. Every scope adjustment was verified, every component tested for perfect function. Davidson, who had been selected as part of a backup team despite his elimination from the training exercise, watched Sarah's preparation with newfound respect. The cocky dismissiveness he had shown weeks earlier had been replaced by genuine admiration for her professionalism. Martinez, he called out as she finished her equipment check. Sarah looked up, surprised to hear him address her directly for the first time since their early confrontations. I owe you an apology, Davidson said, his voice lacking any trace of his former arrogance. I judged you based on everything except what mattered, your ability to do the job. That was wrong of me. Sarah studied his face, seeing genuine remorse in his eyes. We all have our biases, Chief, she replied. What matters is whether we can overcome them. Davidson nodded, extending his hand. For what it's worth, if I were in that compound, I'd want you taking the shot to get me out. Sarah shook his hand firmly. Thank you. That means more than you know. The teams were inserted into their positions, under cover of darkness. using helicopters that dropped them miles from the target area to avoid detection. Sarah and Jackson had the longest approach, requiring them to navigate treacherous mountain terrain while carrying full equipment loads. They reached their designated position just as the sun began to rise, providing them with their first clear view of the target compound. Through their binoculars, they could see the tower where their target was positioned, along with the hostages being held in a building below. "Range?" Sarah asked as she set up her rifle. Jackson used multiple methods to confirm the distance, knowing that accuracy was critical at this extreme range. 2,047 yards, he reported. "That's even farther than we planned for." Sarah felt a familiar calm descend over her as she made her calculations. The mathematics of the shot were staggering. The bullet would take nearly 5 seconds to reach its target, requiring her to account for wind drift, bullet drop, and even the rotation of the Earth itself. The wind conditions were challenging, shifting between different directions and speeds as air currents moved through the mountain valleys. Sarah and Jackson spent hours observing and recording wind patterns, building a detailed picture of how the air moved across their bullet's intended path. As the afternoon wore on, radio traffic indicated that other teams were in position and ready. The rescue operation would begin with synchronized sniper shots designed to eliminate key threats and create confusion among the terrorists. "All sniper. Teams stand by," came the voice of the mission commander. "Execute on my mark in 60 seconds. Sarah settled behind her rifle for what she knew would be the most important shot of her career. Through her scope, she could barely make out the figure in the distant tower. At 2,047 yards, even with her high-powered optics, the target appeared smaller than a grain of rice. Her breathing slowed to its combat rhythm as she made final adjustments to her point of aim. Jackson provided a steady stream of wind updates, his voice calm and professional, despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. 30 seconds, the mission commander announced. Sarah's finger found the trigger, applying just enough pressure to take up the slack. Around her, the world faded into insignificance as her entire universe condensed to the small circle of her scope and the nearly invisible target beyond. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2. Execute, execute, execute. Sarah's rifle spoke with authority, sending its precision bullet on the longest journey of her career. For nearly 5 seconds, the outcome hung in the balance as physics and skill combined across almost 3 miles of mountain air. Through his spotting scope, Jackson watched the bullet's trace disappear into the distance. The target in the tower suddenly stumbled and fell, confirming what they both knew had just happened. "Hit! Target down!" Jackson reported into his radio. Across the compound, other sniper teams reported their own successes. The coordinated shots had eliminated key threats and created the opening needed for the rescue operation. Within minutes, special operations forces were moving into the compound, while helicopters provided support. The hostages were rescued successfully, with no casualties among the rescue forces. The mission that many had considered nearly impossible had been executed flawlessly, thanks in large part to the precision shooting of the sniper teams. As Sarah and Jackson made their way back to the extraction point, both understood that they had just participated in something extraordinary. The shot Sarah had made would be talked about for years in military circles, but more importantly, it had saved lives and brought hostages home safely. Back at base camp, the successful completion of the real-world mission marked the end of the training program. All 12 remaining students had proven themselves under actual combat conditions, earning their place among the world's elite precision marksmen. During the graduation ceremony, Colonel Harrison personally presented Sarah with her completion certificate. "Staff Sergeant Martinez," he said, "your performance throughout this program, and especially during yesterday's mission, represents the highest standards of military excellence. You have proven that skill and determination matter more than preconceptions or prejudices." As Sarah stood before her peers, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The skepticism and mockery from the early days seemed like ancient history now, replaced by the respect and admiration of soldiers who understood what she had accomplished. Davidson, who had remained for the graduation ceremony despite his early elimination, was among the first to congratulate her. "That shot yesterday will be remembered for a long time," he said. "You've set a new standard for what's possible. Sarah smiled, knowing that she had not only proven herself to her critics but had also opened doors for other women who would follow in her footsteps. The program that had begun with doubts about her abilities had ended with her setting records and saving lives. As the ceremony concluded and the graduates prepared to return to their units, Sarah understood that this was just the beginning. The skills she had demonstrated and the barriers she had broken would inspire others and change perceptions about what it meant to be an elite military sniper. The scoffing had indeed gone silent, replaced by respect, admiration, and the knowledge that when lives hung in the balance, skill mattered more than anything else. Sarah Martinez had proven herself in the ultimate arena, and her legacy would inspire generations of marksmen to come.